Well, I appreciate Mike sharing those things. And I don't preach a whole lot of sermons about giving, but I do around this time of the year because I really believe in this, what we're doing. I know it's God's will. I know that, it's a time to really, push hard on it and do everything I can without being offensive to push you and to spur you on and to make you, really get serious about this. And it's something that I'm going through with myself, and Mike shared he's going through it too. And but this is God's will. This is really important to Him. If you study the Bible from the Old Testament through the New Testament, God's heart for the poor and the needy that's where His heart is. And He wants those who are doing well to care for them, to look out for them, and to protect them, and to help them in their need. And so, this, we got started on it many years ago, and I just feel so blessed that we discovered it. It's kind of funny how we stumbled onto this, because we were raising money to go on a mission trip to Antigua, where my wife and I were missionaries. And it just so happened that was the year that the swine flu, remember the swine flu? Oh. The swine flu broke out. And so we got word from Antigua that we couldn't come, that they were shutting down the island. They weren't letting any tourists on the island. So we had this big sum of money. I think it was like $24,000 or something. I don't remember the exact number. And we said, well, what are we going to do with it? We need to put it toward a good cause. And we found out about Orphan Sunday. And we said, hey, this sounds like something good. And so we began researching it and looking into it. And sure enough, we put that money into some organizations that do work with orphanages. And ever since then, we've just been really invested in it. Really, we've gone to Uganda twice to visit some of the work that we do over there. And we've been to South America to different works that we've been involved in the past. And it's amazing. And it's just something I'm very proud of that our church is doing, Orphan Sunday. So you just bear with me for a couple more weeks until it's over, and I won't be preaching on the subject anymore. But I want to continue just looking at this idea of generosity. Last week, we kind of defined it as being something that it's important about our attitude, that we don't do it reluctantly or feeling like we're compelled to do it, because God loves a cheerful giver. He wants us to understand what we're giving to, and that we feel good about that, and we stand behind that. So attitude is really important, but generosity is giving more than is necessary or expected. So, I mean, we can give. We give every week. Most of us give a certain amount of money every week, a tithe, we call it. And, but this is different. This is a special collection for a very specific purpose to help orphan children, and very targeted, because we want to help ones that are the most vulnerable. In the United States, we have all kinds of programs, safety nets, to care for the kids and so forth. And not saying that isn't important too, but I'm just saying that they are well taken care of. Over in these other third world countries, there are no safety nets. These kids are extremely vulnerable, and widows as well. So that's what this series of lessons is all about. It's about calling you to have a good attitude about giving more than you normally give, for a very good purpose. And this morning I want to talk about courageous generosity. And there's a story. This really happened. This was in Jesus's ministry. He was at the temple, and he witnessed this, and Luke recorded it for it. It says, as he looked up, Jesus saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. I tell you the truth, he said, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. You know, a lot of people, they misunderstand what this is really saying. It's true that it's not about the amount that you give, but it is definitely not saying that, you know, you could be rich and give 2 mites and that's good enough for Jesus. It's talking about this woman's heart, talking about her faith in Jesus. And there's a couple stories like this. Another one I love is when Elijah was told by the Lord during a period of famine to go to the certain village, and there would be a poor widow there that he had commanded to take care of him through this famine. And so he went to the town, and when he got there, he saw this poor widow at the gate, and he called out to her and said, "Hey, could you get me a drink of water?" And she said, "Okay." And so she started walking to get the water, and he said, "And could you bring me a piece of bread too, please?" And she looked at him and she said, "You know, I have this little bit of flour left. This is the last bit of flour that I have for me and my son. I'm about to go home and cook some bread for our final meal." And Elijah said, "It's okay." He says, "Trust me, the Lord's going to take care of you." And so she went back home and she cooked the bread and she brought him the first piece of bread. And then it said that Elijah stayed with that family through the famine, and they had an overflowing amount of flour and oil to take care of all of them. It takes great faith to give courageously like that. We were talking about how fear is such a problem with us in our faith. And fear, again, is something that holds us back from being generous. I think about how the fear of not having enough. These poor widows that we read about in the Bible, they had nothing. This poor widow in Luke 21 put in all she had to live on. That wasn't a tithe. That wasn't 10%. That was 100%. That was all she had to live on. And this poor widow that Elijah went to, this was her final meal. This was all she had. That would be hard, right? And I'm not asking you to do that. That would be extremely difficult. We, on the other hand, struggle with the fear of not having enough to really enjoy life the way we want to. So if I give generously, this is going to cut into my vacation money. Or this is going to cut into my, shopping money. Or this is going to cut into, my going out to dinner money. Or this is going to cut into, this is all giving out of our wealth. And it's interesting to me in that Luke 21 passage that Jesus observed these givers. And he knew which ones were rich and which ones were poor, and he knew the amount that they were giving. And he evaluated it in that little 4 verses. And he said, this poor widow gave more than all the rest of them who were giving out of their wealth. That's what we do, see? We're giving out of our wealth, not out of our poverty. But we still struggle with it. That's kind of... I think about the story of the rich young ruler that came to Jesus and said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And he said, you know what the commandments are? Keep the commandments. Do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not murder, and the rest of them. He says, I've done all that since I was a boy. What do I still lack? Jesus said, go sell all your possessions and give to the poor, and you'll have treasures in heaven. And it says the man went away very sad. Why? He had so much money. It would alter the way he likes to live. The story of the rich fool, the parable where the young man came to Jesus and said, tell my brother to give me my half of the inheritance. And Jesus told this parable about a rich man who had a bumper crop, and his barns were too small to store it all away. So he tore down the smaller barn, built a bigger one, and filled it up. And then he looked and he says, and now I have stored up for myself for many years. Now I will eat, drink, and be merry. And God said, you fool, this very night your life is required from you. Over and over again, Jesus taught about how we use our wealth. It's not wrong to be wealthy. It's not wrong to be rich. But when it has that stranglehold on our heart, it's a problem. That's greed, and greed is idolatry. And so we have to look at things from this lens of Jesus, that we are rich and we are giving out of our wealth. You know, there's another reason that I think we fear giving generously, and that is being taken advantage of. And I understand that. I mean, when you look at it, there's been so many scandals in Christian churches. I've told you I read an article a while back or saw an interview or something about 7 tele-evangelists or mega church evangelists who were being investigated by the IRS for fraud. And they were ripping people off, and they were buying themselves. One of them had 7 private jets. Now, can you imagine that? 7 private jets? No. One for each day of the week, I guess. They had homes in Hawaii and Tahiti and big, beautiful homes. They had been just splurging. And see, the people that were given the money, they were thinking it was going toward God's work. And so I know people have a fear about being taken advantage of. And that's why we are so careful here to really vet these organizations that we give to, that we want to really know, how much money goes to those kids, not how much money goes to administration to pay your $200,000 a year salaries, even though some people may be worthy of that. I don't know. But we want the majority of that money going directly to what we're hoping to help. Nobody likes getting ripped off or scammed. This is something interesting to me, too, that Jesus said. He said in Luke chapter 6, verse 27, but I tell you, who hear me, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other also. If someone takes your cloak, do not stop him from taking your tunic. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others what you would have others do to you. Give to those who ask, and don't demand it back. We were talking about this a while back about, it's hard not to wonder what they're going to spend their money on when you give it to them. When you see those people on the side of the road with the little signs, help me. My thoughts are that guy's just going to go out and get some drugs, or they're going to buy some alcohol with that. Or Joanne, I think, said a while back in one of the studies, she says, you know what? That's for God to work out. I just try to help people who need help, and how they spend the money, they'll give account for that. I do believe that we need to be discerning and careful about stuff. But what generally happens is we just don't give to anybody because we're not sure about anybody. And that's tragic, because there are people out there who really need help. And so Jesus is saying, look, if somebody asks you for help, help them. No one likes to be manipulated or used. That's another thing that I struggle with. It's interesting, when Jesus had just finished feeding the 4,000, he got into a boat and he crossed to the other side of the lake to retreat, to get some time to himself and recuperate a little bit. And the people ran around and got in boats, and they went and followed him. And when he got over there, Jesus said, they're like, oh, we didn't know you were leaving, so we follow you. And you know what Jesus said? This, you should read this, John 6:25-27. He said, you didn't come over here because you saw miraculous wonders. You came here because your bellies were filled.
Because what?
Your bellies were filled, and you want more. See, they weren't there to learn from Jesus or to show him the honor and respect that is due him because he is the Christ, the Son of the living God. They were just trying to get a free meal. I used to be a lot more involved in the homeless around here. I've gotten away from it, but when we used to go to the park with your sister and hand out food. There would be on, I think it was Tuesday nights. Did you go with us once?
Bill Belly.
Yeah. We used to go there and we'd sit and have a meal with them and talk to them and stuff. And they have this whole schedule worked out. Tonight it's at this park. Tomorrow night it's at the Presbyterian church. And the next night it's over here at this church. And this one's here. If you need clothes, this is the church to go to here. And if you need doctors, this is the church to go through here. And they had this whole system played out. They were just working it. They knew where they could get gift cards. They knew this whole system. And that really turned me off. And that, that made me feel like, oh, they're just using us. It's a lousy feeling to be used, especially when you have a sincere desire to help people. But Jesus said, you need to overcome that. Don't let that hold you back. The fear of not being appreciated. No one likes not being acknowledged or thanked when they're helped. I've said before, It's offensive to me when, I'll go and I'll open the door for someone going into Walmart and they'll walk by with their phone in their face and not even look at me. And I feel like saying,
Well,
"You're welcome." But all of these situations that we find ourselves in are no excuse for not helping people and being generous. We need to get past that. We need to acknowledge that God is the judge. You judge your hearts. And if I have the ability to help someone, I need to help them. Of course, generosity, the reality is, often goes unnoticed and unappreciated. That's why God's people are encouraged to not grow weary in doing good. For at the proper time, you will reap a harvest if you do not give up. At the proper time, you'll get a thank you, or well done, good and faithful servant. But in the meantime, don't get tired of this. Don't let this hinder you. Don't let this keep you from doing what is right and good. And that is being generous and helping the poor. Our giving is described as a test in the Bible. It's a test of our faith. Do we really trust God to take care of us? Jesus in Matthew chapter 6, 25 through 34, this is a sermon you're all familiar with, where Jesus said, "Don't worry about your life, what you'll eat or drink, or your clothes, what you'll wear. Your heavenly Father knows all that you need, and he will take care of you. Look at the lilies of the field. Does God not clothe them and take care? What about the birds in the air? Doesn't he feed them? You're of much more value to him. He'll care for you. He'll take care of you. Don't worry about these things." In fact, in the preceding verses, and this is, when you study the Bible, you always want to look at the context. In the preceding verses, in Matthew chapter 6, 19 through 24, you know what he's talking about there? That's where he talks about, "Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Store up for yourself treasures in heaven." And then he goes on to say, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And he says, you cannot serve both God and money. And then verses 25 through 34, do not worry about your life. It's a test of faith. It says something. Do I really believe these things? Do I really believe if I quit storing up treasures on earth that and I instead invest in kingdom work, that there will be great reward for me in heaven? Do I really believe that? Do we really believe that God is actually going to reward us one day for this? I believe it. I believe it. It's a test of our love also. We know that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. To love your neighbor as yourself. And the Bible tells us that the greatest way of showing our love is through our generosity, helping others. In a couple places in James chapter 2, he talks about someone coming into the church who needs clothes and needs food. And you say to him, "Oh, go and be warm and well fed and do nothing." He said, "What good is that?" Do we really care? Or are we just going through the motions? 1 John 3, verses 16 through 18 talks about how that if a brother is in need and you have the ability to help them and don't help them, he asks the question, how can the love of God be in you? It's not. Because if you have the means to help them, the love of God helps them. And it's a test of our motives as well. Are we giving with the right motives? Jesus, talked about this in Matthew chapter 6, 1-4. He talked about how the rich, the Pharisees and so forth would come and throw their large offerings into the temple treasury, and then they would blow the trumpets and ring the bells so that everybody would pay attention to it. Did you see what so-and-so gave? Wow, that was a lot. And again, they gave out of their wealth. And they gave because they wanted that acknowledgement from people, thinking, wow, they're really generous. Our motives are extremely important to God, and Paul spent a whole chapter talking about how, if I do things, if I give my body to the flames, if I do all this and say, I do this because of my faith, but have not love, it is worthless. Motivation. We talked about that a little last week in 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 7, where he said, do not give out of compulsion, but with a cheerful heart, because God loves a cheerful giver. So let me just speak on a few ways that we can begin practicing courageous generosity. And it really does start with trusting God. It really does start with, what Mike was saying about what he's going through and what I shared with you a couple of weeks ago, these thoughts that I'm going through, those are real. Those are not, we're not making those things up. Those are real reservations that we have because our giving is going to cut into some things if we're really giving generously. And we have to remind ourselves where we got all this. Yeah. And we have to trust God that He's going to continue to care for us and make sure that we have all that we need. And so trusting God completely, trusting His teachings, trusting that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Trusting His promises that there is reward. That's not, it's supposed to be an incentive. It's supposed to help us and encourage us and spur us on to be generous. Second thing, I think, is that you have to give freely, no strings attached. At some point, you got to just cut those strings and let go. I had a guy once who used to go to church, and it's ironic, but one day I was preaching in the old church building, and the doors were open, and this guy stopped in the middle of the road out there in his pickup truck. And he was a construction, he was a contractor. And he just stared at me, and I'm like preaching a sermon, and he just stopped in the middle of the road looking out at me. And so then a little while later, he pulls into the parking lot, and he comes into the church, and he sits down. And so afterwards, I went up to him, and I introduced myself, and I said, yeah, I saw you out there in the road. What were you doing? He says, God has just incredibly blessed my life recently. I got this multi-million-dollar contract. I am making money hand and foot. I'm raking it in. I've never seen so much money. And he said, I just felt convicted that I needed to I needed to thank God and I needed to give back. And so, I want to become a Christian and I want to honor God with this wealth that he's blessed me with. And he was baptized, and he and his wife was later baptized, and their children started coming, and they were here for a long time, and then they were having problems, and he ended up divorcing his wife, and the kids, were struggling, and I remember one day he got up in church, or got up afterwards, and came up to me, and he says, "You know what? I'm done with this. I don't believe this crap." He says, I'm out of here." I said, "Oh man, don't do that." He said, "I wish I would have figured this out earlier. Didn't spend so much money on this church." And I was like, if I had that money right now, I would give it back to you. When you give, it's important that you just let go of it. It's gone. It's a gift to God. And you don't think about it anymore. You don't regret. See, that's exactly what he doesn't want us to do. And that's why it's so important for us to think about this ahead of time and work through these feelings ahead of time so that when we do write that check and we put it in the collection, that we feel good about it. We're happy we did it. So much of our giving is conditional. We give hoping that there's a blessing for us that comes from it. But true generosity is unconditional. It's interesting in that passage in Luke chapter 6, in verse 32, it says, "If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to the sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High God, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful then, just as your Father in heaven is merciful." No strings attached. Strive to be like the Good Samaritan. One of my favorite stories in all the Bible that the two religious guys crossed the road and went on and did nothing, and then the Samaritan, this despised, rejected human being by the Jews, stopped, got off his donkey and bound the man's wounds and put him on his own donkey and walked by the side of him and took him into the village and got him a room and told the innkeeper to take care of him until he came back through and he would pay for all of it. Strive to be like that. Strive to be that kind of individual. That it doesn't matter who the person is, what nationality, what religion. None of those things matter. But that you want to do God's will, which is helping others who are in need. That's the true heart of God. That's true religion that God accepts. And finally, we got to start making the most of all of our opportunities. Generosity and evangelism go hand in hand. When you look at the early church, we're studying the book of Acts on Wednesday nights, you see how immediately these young Christians began giving to help the needy, that they sold their possessions and gave to all who were in need. And they had each other into their homes and took care of each other. And it says, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Why? Because when you are kind to someone, it has an impact on them. It has an influence on them and makes them want to know more about you and why you're like you are. So follow in the footsteps of Jesus. Let it be on my tombstone. He went around doing good. All of what we've talked about is simply imitating Jesus. That's all it is. It's just trying to be like Jesus. And in 1 John chapter 2, we'll end with this passage. In 1 John 2, 3 through 6, it says, we know that we have come to know him if we obey his commands. The man who says, I know him, but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But if anyone obeys his word, God's love is truly made complete in him. This is how we know we are in him. Whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did. What would Jesus do? Just live your life that way. What would Jesus do? We're going to sing a song in closing. Number 71, a song that expresses our love for God and our desire to be with him. One of the things that our generosity shows. Let's all be standing as we sing the song, please.